All right, welcome back to We Never Left. Today we have Yiwen from Nitro Labs. Yiwen is the founder of Nitro Labs, and Nitro Labs is basically scaling and bringing modularity to Solana. So, Yiwen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Imran.
Yeah, I would love to start off with some personal lore of an origin story. I think the many characters in crypto always have lots of interesting backgrounds and starting stories. What brought you to crypto, and what made you believe in the industry, in crypto and blockchain, and what drives you to build within crypto?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. So I first started getting into distributed systems in university. I studied computer science and I was part of some clubs and organizations on campus that dabbled in this area in blockchains. And then also my favorite course from undergrad was actually a distributed systems course. So we studied various types of systems, and of course blockchains were a major part of that. Yeah, so that was kind of my first foray into blockchains and crypto, and so I've always been very fascinated by the technology. After I graduated, I worked in web 2 for a few years, but in a lot of my free time I would write like Bitcoin scripts or Ethereum contracts and just play around with that. Over time, these became more serious projects that I found myself spending all of my nights and weekends doing. And then slowly over time, felt a bit constrained by the limitations of the EVM and what we can and couldn't do on chain. And that's what pushed me to start looking at alternative VMs like Cosmos, Cosm, and also Solana's SVM. And from there, started spending all of my time in Solana, and that was sort of like the high level origin story of how we started building Nitro Labs.
That's interesting. I've heard a lot of very similar stories of people that wanted to build and found the limitations or frustrations within the EVM scope, and then moving over to SVM. I also came from EVM. Used to hit
Mhm.
Kyber as a aggregator on a few chains. Even on the go-to-market side, it kind of burns people out. I think if you're trying to market on like 8 chains or 10 chains at the same time. But I do have a question here then, right? So with Termina, what you guys are doing is bringing modularity to Solana. So Solana is scaling. Is that it? In fact, you guys say that that's the end state for SVM, right? So we'd love to kind of like maybe dig in or maybe challenge here, right? Because as someone that came from EVM and still love EVM and the builders and the network there, a lot of it has been a design problem where modularity has introduced a lot of complexities and the need for interoperability that hasn't fully been solved today, right? And then that kinds of leads into things like fragmentation of liquidity, of experiences, of users, of community and builders. So we'd love to take understand your take here with regards to how that would happen on Solana in a different way, if you guys envision that.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the questions that we get asked all the time is, or it's not really a question, but it's more of a comment. Solana doesn't need L2. Solana is fast enough to scale as a single shared state L1 blockchain. So I would like to challenge this take because Solana already has a lot of L2s or network extensions, as they can be called. So, Imran, of course, you're familiar with Zeta and Bullet and the work being done there. So, for Zeta, the L1 itself is too expensive and too slow to match the speeds of centralized exchanges. So, by having this dedicated environment, you can provide an interface and a UX that's very similar to that of a centralized exchange while still giving users custody of their own funds. In this similar realm, there's also Cube, right? They have a CubeNet that's designed as a async L2 where trades are matched and executed there, but they're ultimately settled to the underlying L1s. Outside of DeFi, there's also Get Code. It's like a P2P payments network where you send transactions to their sequencer, and it ultimately does the transactions for you on the L1, but it gives you additional guarantees, like more reliability, more uptime, and some privacy guarantees as well. Outside of these, there's also in the deepen space, like Grass, they have their sovereign data rollup, and all the data collection, validation, uh, lineage, all of that is done there, while the L1 is just responsible for verifying the proofs of these data. So these are just a few examples, but a lot of these teams made this transition even before the congestion issues this past April. So it's very important to kind of keep track of this pattern of these teams building out this infrastructure for their own needs and creating different types of network extensions.
Yeah, so I've heard a lot of good arguments to build out whether it's network extensions or L2s with related towards use cases like high frequency trading or let's say gaming or let's say micropayments and stuff like that. Um, Specifically with Termina, what are you guys offering builder teams here? Is it a rollup as a service? Is it extension as a service? Or is it a combination?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we prefer to use the term network extension because it includes rollups, but it also includes other solutions. So it's a more holistic, comprehensive type of terminology. But we are creating sort of a network extension stack so that teams can take this stack, deploy it, and then build their application in conjunction with it. So all of the examples that we've just talked about in DeFi, micropayments, Deepin, these teams are not infrastructure teams. They are application teams that have built this infrastructure to solve their own pain point. And when we see a pattern of independent teams rebuilding the same thing, reinventing the same wheel, it's much easier to just have a stack that you can take and use so that you can launch it, build your DeFi specific, payment specific, deepen specific business logic instead of having to worry about all this infrastructure about uptime, reliability, and availability. So TLDR, Termina is offering a network extension stack, and I'm happy to go into the specifics of what this stack entails.
So let's talk about the user's perspective first, right? So what specifically would this enable for the users? Let's say in terms of the things that they know and expect around things like faster, cheaper, better, more reliable. What are the incremental or exponential improvements that we seek to introduce here? Let's say from the mainnet on Solana experience.
Yeah, so I would like to segment users into two categories, right? One is what we perceive as our users, which is other teams, like
Yes.
these DeFi teams, deepen teams, payments teams. And then the other segment is end users. So this is retail users that are users of these teams' applications. So are you asking about the former group or the latter or both?
Yeah, so I like to take the view of the end user, right? Why
Mhm.
does this matter in the first place? And what experience does it enable for them as an
Mhm.
end user? So specifically I'm asking for the end user or the retail user here. But obviously you can
Mhm.
dive into both if you like. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So for the end user, the retail user that's trading or participating, contributing bandwidth to some deepen project, it shouldn't matter. They shouldn't have to know what the underlying infrastructure is. So they shouldn't have to care about whether this project is built as a network extension or if it's built as an L1 application directly. But for them, by having this infrastructure would enable our user teams to provide their users with a better UX. And this UX would consist of um, cheaper transactions for micropayments. It makes it actually feasible, right? Uh, so for that specific example, on Solana, one transaction costs a few fractions of a cent. But if your micro payment is less than $1 anyway, that's a huge proportion. That's a huge cut of your of what you're actually paying. And so if you're making a lot of micropayments, those transaction fees add up. For DeFi, again, this is like touching on what Zeta is doing. For market makers, if they're interacting with a faster lower latency platform, then they can offer tighter spreads, and so users can trade without having having so much slippage. For Deepin, Grass, it just can't be built on the L1. It's reaching requests of 1 million per, like multiple millions, tens of millions per minute, and so you just cannot put that on the L1. So it's not feasible either from a technical or economic perspective to have that without a network extension.
And what do you think are the core use cases that are better built on SVM today over, let's say, all the others that we've been exploring and talking about before, right? EVM, COSP, WASM, and Move, and any other alternatives that builders are considering today?
Yeah, for sure. So I previously was working in the Ethereum space on EVM at the application layer. So I can speak a bit about my experience, and then today, like what I see as being
Yep.
more viable on SVM versus EVM. So for EVM, especially pre-EIP 4844, each transaction would cost like a few dollars, and in periods of high congestion, like tens of dollars. And so you really can't put that much logic on chain as an application developer. And what you do right on chain, you have to spend a lot of time optimizing it to minimize the gas costs. And so a lot of the work, a lot of the mental load is on that rather than making like a good UX and thinking about the business logic. So the only things that can happen on chain that are fast and cheap are very limited. And so a lot of the a lot of like what you like trading things uh, and like deepen, for example, you can't post that on chain. So it's very limited in terms of what you can do. It's only like very big things that you can make into a transaction. And then moving into what I see as uh, being better suited for Solana and SVM. When transactions are cheaper, you enable and unlock a lot more use cases. So, for example, peer-to-peer payments, sending money to your friends, family, or other people abroad, and um, having that type of setting, you can't do on Ethereum unless it's like a very big transaction that's very infrequent. Also um, trading like meme coins now, and also just tokens in general, you can have a lot of that happen on chain in Solana. And then finally deepen, when you have these like different devices that are securing the network, that are posting state and data, it's much cheaper to have that on Solana than on Ethereum.
Yeah, so I think we talked about many of the users starting to build rollups or extensions even prior to some of the major network congestions that we've seen in the past year.
Mhm.
But maybe could you explain a bit more around the issues that you see, or at least that you hear from the teams that work with you, right? In terms of
Mhm.
what are the issues on Solana today that builders are experiencing that actually push them to explore and actually decide, okay, we need to build up our own rollup or our own network extension.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe we can categorize these into different verticals, and we can go through each vertical. Um,
Yep.
is there one you like to touch on first?
No specific one. Like, whatever you guys are looking at in terms of what's on your plate.
Yeah, for sure. So for a lot of these teams, just across verticals, they're experiencing and seeing or expecting a very high volume of transactions. And so in terms of scalability, their current choice right now is to move like everything off chain to hit the scale, but then the trade-off is being decentralized or designing some sort of network extension where you can have a dedicated instance, dedicated block space, but you're still tying things back to the L1. So we've already touched on dexes.
Hmm.
One core part of that is like you want to match, especially for order books, if you want to match the speed of a sex, you kind of need to have that in a network extension L2 type of infrastructure format. And then for the aside from like speed and cost alone, there's also the privacy aspect. So a couple of the DeFi teams we're working with and exploring with right now, they're seeing some of the limit orders on chain get farmed, especially for low liquidity markets. It's very easy to get botted, and so they want the matching and execution of those limit orders to happen in sort of a dark pool-esque environment, off chain, and then once the orders are matched, they're finally settled back to the L1, so users still have full custody of their funds. Yeah, so that's for DeFi, and then
Yep.
for payments, I mentioned Get Code, and so they're specifically focused on, or one of their areas they're focusing on is micropayments, and again, you can't have that on L1 where the transaction fee is a huge proportion of the total value you're transferring. And then the other aspect that they focus on heavily is privacy. So they are tailored more towards a Web 2 audience where you kind of get privacy as a default. And so pseudonymity is not enough of a guarantee for these teams. They want full anonymity or privacy. And so
Mm.
the get code sequencer has visibility into everything, so they can still be compliant with law enforcement regulation if need be, but they split up your transactions. The sequencer chops it up and then it splits it across these different splitter contracts, and it does a bunch of other things on the L1. So it's really hard to trace what's uh, who is sending whom what and how much. So
Yeah, no businesses want to show all their vendor and staff payments, do they? On
yeah,
chain.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think for retail users, like folks are not too concerned about
Yeah.
privacy, and we're fine with just having a pseudonymous address or like maybe even being public with it. But for businesses, they're that's sort of table stakes for them, especially if they're more Web 2.
And being able to enable this privacy and then all the network benefits of obviously being fast, cheap. I think that's really going to unlock like multi-billions of dollars of on-chain payments from businesses. Yeah, if that actually does enable.
Yeah, and then the last area that I was thinking is deepen. So
Mm.
if you have a bunch of devices, hundreds of thousands of devices in your network, and these are pinging your network all the time to show they're online and they're
Yeah.
doing work. You need to put that data somewhere, and you can't really put it on the L1. So yeah, right now a lot of teams are actually putting these in very centralized places, but we're trying to help them keep as much of it on chain as possible through data rollups.
It's very interesting, but I mean, I do have to ask, right? Like, because a lot of core Solana today is ultra focused on scaling Solana. So you have like your ZK compression and your Anza
Mhm.
and Fire Dancers and like even people like Austin trying to recreate the internet, right? So like
Yeah.
what happens in a world where Solana hits like 1 million TPS, is 10x cheaper than today, like existentially, do you think that rollups and extensions will still be the end game for Solana or SVM scaling?
Yeah, I still do. So I think it will take some time for us to get there, but if we do, network extensions L2s still offer other benefits outside of scalability alone. So one, as we already touched on, is a private or more permissioned environment, which for certain use cases is sort of a table stakes requirement, and then also having dedicated block space. You can kind of manage the uptime of your own network. So I believe when there were the congestion issues back in April, it was so hard to land a transaction. Right, there was such a high failure rate. But Get Code, they were just fine because they have their sequencer. That's what the users interface with, and so they could just keep like a backlog of transactions and then settle that to L1 more asynchronously than they would normally. But they were able to like run along smoothly despite the underlying Solana network having these issues.
Yes. Um, so I think like you guys are definitely coming out from the modularity playbook. I think with modularity, I think the vision here is an integrated future. Probably a lot around playing around abstraction, maybe some sort of endpoint where users don't even know whether they're interacting on mainnet, an extension, a rollup, and everything else being extracted here. Can you espouse or explain a little bit about that environment or that future that you guys seek to enable with what Termina is building with your builders today?
Yeah, for sure. So for our network extension stack, it's designed to be very modular. We have three main modules at the moment. So one is the SVM engine. This is actually the runtime. We
Mm.
have the ZK proving aspect, and then we have the data module. So teams can take the entire stack, all modules, and build like a fully fledged rollup, or they can take a portion of this stack and build sort of a hybrid type of extension. And this latter case is kind of like what we're more excited to see and what we see um, differing from the status quo on Ethereum. Uh, some of the teams and projects that we've touched on in our conversation are structured more as like a hybrid extension rather than a roll up per se, because they're still posting state to the L1. Everything is the source of truth is still the L1. And so it's not really a roll up with like a fragmented state and like fragmenting liquidity. It's just extending the network in a different way.
You were talking about network extensions as being hidden from the user's experience so that they can just basically interact with the mainnet. So I think that's one of the things that definitely helps scale the Solana experience. Um, and I think this is, I mean, like scaling Solana is, I kind of feel beyond the technological debate, there is a little bit of this cultural debate as well, where some people actually have a very strong monolithic tribal fixation, yeah, if I were to put it in those words. What do you think people get wrong today about scaling Solana, right? So what do you think are the worst takes that you've seen around in terms of the thinking around scaling Solana and gaining more adoption for Solana, if you can expound on that?
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions is network extensions are taking traffic away from Solana. They're fragmenting the state and they're making things more Ethereum like. But that's not necessarily true because, for example, the deepen teams I mentioned, we're actually trying to keep stuff on chain as much as possible. Right now, out of necessity, to store this huge volume of data that's being generated, they have to put it in a centralized database, a centralized server. But we want to keep that on chain as much as possible by building it as a data roll up or extension instead of just having completely separate piece of state. And then for DeFi and for payments too, if you design things as sort of uh, Batcher hybrid network extension, it's still posting everything to the L1 just in an asynchronous manner rather than synchronous. So the final liquidity, the final custody of funds, that remains on the L1. You're just making the network more performant and more robust against different types of risks and different types of permissionless settings.
Yeah, so your take is that extensions are not parasitic to Solana at all, yeah.
Yeah, they're not. And they're actually like helping move some off-chain things to the L1.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I do want to take some time to go through some personal takes, if that makes sense. So personally, what do you think when you're looking at the whole state of crypto, and not just Solana, right? So you're talking about blockchain, you're talking about crypto. What do you think are the levers that will actually lead towards mass adoption? So specifically in terms of retail users coming in en masse, I think people have established and agreed that we're very early today. So what do you think will lead to that next wave? You know, you're talking about 5x, 10x, 20x, or even 100x from where we are today.
Yeah, for sure. I think right now there's like, maybe I can frame it as two different areas or two different um, topics. So one is the more speculative side, with like trading meme coins, like AI agents, and that, in my opinion, has PMF. And I don't see it as like a fad that's just like here this cycle and gone the next. And I do see meme coins as being different from like the NFT craze last cycle. Uh,
Yeah.
and part of that is because meme coins by definition are not like fronting as trying to be something super serious and super different, whereas like for NFTs back last cycle, and like you're smiling, so I'm curious to hear your opinion too. But yeah, it's just like a different presentation. And so uh, I do, and like some of the teams we're supporting now are focused on meme coins, and I think like their goals and visions for what they want to do make a lot of sense. Um,
Yeah. I
and
mean, the reason I was smiling is because, like you said, meme coins don't have a pretense to pretend to actually be anything
yeah,
other than what they actually are, which is
right,
really
right.
just tokenizing mimetic culture and distributing value to the community and providing some sort of incentive to rally communities together, right? And I think if you
Hmm.
think about it, a lot of what uh, crypto is really just that, right? Trying to figure out how do I distribute culture, how do I
Yeah,
tokenize culture, and how do I rally and coordinate communities. And I think that's also interesting because the first thing that came to mind around meme coins versus NFTs was not that meme coins were actually uh, PvPing NFTs, but rather they were showing how utility tokens are actually a meme in themselves, right? Because many
hmm,
utility tokens came in and said, hey, we are from this legitimate project and we are going to be a governance token and we're going to have so much utility and there's going to be
yeah,
this huge flywheel. And then people go, oh my God, it's just a VC pump and dump, right?
right.
And then with removing all the pretense and say, hey, like we're gonna remove all the suits and all the window dressing, and we're really just gonna have fun. People go, oh, this is so cool, right? Because there is no insider. I mean, obviously you have insider coins, but you have a lot
Yeah,
of coins that took off were meme coins because they were truly like community oriented and
yeah,
they were truly
exactly.
distributed and there were no like early cabals and stuff like that. So that's the reason why I was smiling. But I completely agree with you. I think it's definitely here to stay. I don't know whether it'll stay in the same form that we see
Mhm.
today because I think it's all experiments, right? So like people will just keep experimenting with supply, distribution, and the nature of the token and the ethos until people kind of find models that kind of stick. And I'm pretty sure like every serious project are actually seriously looking at meme coins and going, what do I take out of these experiments to apply to our own tokenomics and to our own token DNA and to our own like flywheel.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I share a lot of those same thoughts, but I think you phrased it very eloquently. So that's great. And to touch on what you said about community too, for for these like different NFT projects in the past that were very hyped, the price to just like join in the collection was so high. But for meme coins, you can choose how much you want to buy. So it really is a lot more accessible and community driven just from the get go.
How would you describe your own crypto holdings and behavior? Are you just a long-term investor? Do you YOLO? If you can share with the people hearing our audience today.
Yeah, for sure. I would say I'm more of a long-term holder for things. I have like the a long-term view on the value of things, but I do
Yeah,
enjoy I do enjoy like some of the meme coin degen parts of the space too.
yeah. I mean, it's very similar for me, right? Like I hold more than 80% in my like super long-term convictions. The only thing I do is DCA in. But I do have like that tiny, like less than 5%, to touch leverage or to touch like shitters and stuff like that. So yeah, for those listening, please, don't touch leverage on meme coins unless it's something that you can write off completely
Yeah.
because that's, uh, 99% of people will lose it all.
Yeah,
Um,
not financial advice.
so yeah, exactly. So I want to just probably end off our conversation today by asking you, what can people expect next from Termina? Is there anything upcoming, big news or recent news that you want to touch on that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, for sure. So um, early next week, this will have passed by the time the recording comes out. We are announcing a ZK SVM along with uh, collaboration from Succinct as well as Anza. So shout out to those two teams for supporting this work. The ZK SVM in a network extension context enables us to generate ZK proofs over any arbitrary Solana computation. And so uh, by having a ZK proving system, it's a huge step forward from the traditional bisection algorithm because you can cut the challenge window down to just a few hours instead of a whole week. And the ZK SVM, ZK proving aspect can also be leveraged in the future to generate privacy preserving ZK proofs. So no information is leaked at all. And this would be a more eloquent way of doing privacy rather than maybe what some teams are currently doing with splitting up transactions, routing them through different contracts, and so on and so forth. Yeah, we're very excited to announce that as we've been working on it for the past 2-3 months.
Yeah, I'm very happy that you guys could share it here as well, even before you guys went live with it. Okay, cool. I think we've come to the end. But for those who'd like to check out what Termina is doing, check out its ZKSVM, or maybe even get in touch with you and the team. Where should they look for? Where should they go?
Yeah, so our team Twitter is at Termina XYZ. Please just DM us there. We're very responsive if you have any questions or would like to get in touch. We also have a form where you can register to join our private network and schedule a demo with the team. So for the different partners we're working with right now, um, they're using our private network. We don't have it public permissionless deployments yet, but if you're interested, we're definitely very happy to spin up an instance for you and help answer questions that you may have.
That's awesome. Ewan from Nitro Technology and Termina, thanks so much again for being here today. And hopefully everything goes well with your ZKSVM launch, and hopefully we should have another chat next time.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Imran.